Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado, who's a little more well-rested than me.
Yes.
About 48 hours removed from kickoff of Oregon State at Stanford. It has been a long and mostly sleepless 2 days since then for me. So we are going to see if I can power through this episode. I am going to give it my best shot, but the sleep deprivation already kicked in. Forgot to send Angie the link to the show and the rundown, and so she texted me about a minute before we hit record and said, "You sending the link?" So it could be one of those episodes today. But
And
Angie,
that's not like
check
you,
in
Carter.
with you. What's your mental state like 2 days removed from Oregon State's miraculous win at Stanford?
What a game. I mean, and I'm going to actually be super honest because I actually had to watch the last play later because I fell asleep.
So
yeah,
my sleep deprived self over here is like,
yes.
Really?
Yes. So I actually had a travel day that day, Carter, and I was up at 3:30 in the morning on Saturday. So it was, yeah. And can you blame me? That game started off so bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. And game ended just minutes before midnight in Palo Alto, that in Pacific time at least. I would imagine very few people on the East Coast were watching the end of that.
I saw Evanson Bernard tweeted that he finally turned it off at 2:45 a.m., which it's kind of crazy because our family was supposed to be in Fort Myers, Florida this week. So we were going to be staying up till 2:45 watching the game, but Hurricane had different plans for us.
A very late night, I finished up work and closed my laptop just before 4 a.m. and then got up about 2.5-3 hours later to head to the San Jose airport and fly back up to Oregon. So yeah, it's been a long couple of days. I just made the 3-hour round trip commute down to Corvallis for today's press conference. It's been a long one, but again, we're gonna push through that, and today we're gonna recap that win down on the farm. A 28-27 result for Oregon State that, of course, if you watched it, if you've been anywhere on social media recently, and if you're an Oregon State fan, I'm sure you are aware of how that game ended with a 56-yard touchdown from Trayshawn Harrison that I think will live on as one of the more memorable plays in Oregon State football history.
Yeah, that was amazing. And for him to grab that kind of over the shoulder, huge play. And I think being that I've watched a lot of Oregon State football, what I'm left with is how many times has Stanford done that to Oregon State? And, with those big tight end wide receivers that they seem to always have. And I recall a game, I don't remember what year it was, back at Reeser, where Oregon State had a huge win. I know Ryan Nall was on the team that year, and Stanford ended up stealing that victory. But huge catch. I mean, Damian Martinez had a huge run. Silas Bolden had a big catch. So all in all, I think that last quarter was kind of where everything kind of started to click for them.
The fourth quarter in particular, and really the last 5 minutes or so, but everything up until that point had mostly gone Stanford's direction, or at least not in Oregon State's direction. It was a game that I think was marked by offensive inefficiency for 3 quarters, a couple of defensive lapses, but in the end, Oregon State does pull it off. They stayed the course and came back to win that. So we're going to recap that today here on this game recap episode of the Damn Podcast. Thanks for joining us live if you are doing so on YouTube, and if you're listening on the audio side and you're wondering why the podcast didn't show up in your feed until Monday night, it's because I was traveling all day yesterday. Angie was getting settled down in Arizona, and we did have to push it back by a day. But on today's episode, we're going to talk about those key moments down in the fourth quarter. I'll just kind of give a little insight on the experience at Stanford Stadium because it was a very unique environment. as I'm sure you may have seen on TV. We'll talk about that ESPN crew real quick as well, and then we'll dive into the game, do some game flow type stuff, some analysis, talk about what went well for Oregon State and what didn't, because I think about 90% of that stuff did not go Oregon State's way. Hit on a couple of the injuries and revisit our keys to the game. But let's start, Angie, with the fourth quarter, where Oregon State came back from a 2-touchdown deficit. And you mentioned it. It started with Silas Bolden, but I think before that even, we have to go to the 29-yard run from Damian Martinez that set up the touchdown pass to Silas Bolden, because that felt like the play that Oregon State needed to get off the schneid offensively. Because to that point, the Beavers only had 10 points in the game. Yardage-wise, they were getting outgained by Stanford significantly, but then Damian Martinez rattles off a 29-yard run, and Jonathan Smith said after the game that was, in fact, the play that really sparked Oregon State.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those big explosive plays over 20 yards that Oregon State had really struggled to do anything with earlier in the game. So for him to bust off that 29-yarder, set up, you could see the sideline almost come alive when that happened. And it set up, it kind of turned things around. Like you said, that was the play that turned things around, led to the Silas Bolden, I almost said Victor, Silas Bolden touchdown, and kind of turned the fortunes. But like I said, what an exciting, like you said, last 5 minutes of that game.
Yeah, and we move up to the 5.5 minute mark or so, and it's Damian Martinez again getting it done with his legs. The guy took 3 carries in this game and ended up as Oregon State's leading rusher, and mostly, that was because of his 43-yard touchdown run, where I will admit I missed that play. I was walking down from the press box to the field at that time with about 5 minutes left, because that's when our access becomes available at most games, and that wasn't the case at Stanford. So I was on the concourse when it happened, and I heard a big cheer and was like, did somebody just score? And sure enough, it was Damian Martinez going for 43 yards there. Oregon State's only down by a touchdown, misses the 2-point conversion. It's at that point, is it a 6-point game at that point? I'm trying to remember the exact score at that time, but it was a 1-score game.
1-score game.
Let's fast forward then a couple of minutes later to a big defensive play that I think will go underappreciated, because Martinez's run, huge, put Oregon State in a position to come back and win that game. It will go underappreciated because it wasn't the touchdown that won it. The defensive stop that happened next is the one that will get overlooked the most, but in my opinion was as important as Martinez's touchdown, as important as Harrison's touchdown, and it was John McCartan's sack on Stanford's backup quarterback on a 3rd and 3 to not only prevent them from running out the clock with a first down, not only to prevent them from not being able to go for it on 4th down and potentially get that first down, but to make them settle for 3 points and keep Oregon State within striking distance. A touchdown would give them the win. That play by John McCartan, I think, is as big as any in that game.
Absolutely. And like you said, I think it's gone underappreciated, because all we're seeing is and rightfully so. I mean, that Trayshawn Harrison touchdown was huge, but like you said, they wouldn't have even had that opportunity. Stanford was kind of working to run out the clock, like 3rd and 3. I mean, for Oregon State, that's a Coletto package right there.
Yeah.
And then to back them up and have them settle for 3, that was the key to the game, in my opinion, to keep Oregon State in this and give them that opportunity.
On a field goal attempt that it was, by no means a gimme there. That was a 46-yarder for Stanford. And so again, to McCartan's credit, you're pushing them to the very edge of field goal range. Stanford did convert there, of course, and extended its lead. But again, just a play that cannot be highlighted enough for how significant it was, because Stanford was 3 yards away from winning that game. And McCartan came up with the big sack there for the Beavers. But then, of course, that set up Trayshawn Harrison's 56-yard touchdown, which it's awesome that we have a question about this in the chat, because I wrote this in the show notes. We don't have a name for the play yet. It was very similar to the Minneapolis Miracle.
I like the Midnight Miracle.
Yeah, so this comment comes in from Tanis. Do we have a name for that catch by Harrison? If we don't, may I suggest the Midnight Miracle? And I like that because as I said, that play did occur pretty close to midnight. The alliteration for a play like that, yeah, it has to be alliterative. And I do like Midnight Miracle. Maybe we'll tentatively roll with that for now. But it was a 56-yarder. It was very reminiscent of that play in Minneapolis. You've got a receiver who makes an impressive catch down the sideline. The defenders almost freeze because they have no idea what's going on. And the receiver at that point is just thinking touchdown. And that's ultimately, of course, what Harrison did.
And I just need to go on the record because I was really, really critical of Trayshawn Harrison the first couple games of the season for his drops. So like I said, those were still not good at the time, but he has really, really stepped up. And we've seen huge improvements week to week. So I just wanted to go on the record there because I was a little critical. But that's the beauty of football. Guys get better and improve. That's the goal.
That's Trayshawn Harrison making Angie Machado eat her words. Now, on the flip side, let's take a victory lap. As Hunter points out in the YouTube chat, got to give it to the BeaverBlitz team, but y'all were on Damian Martinez from the jump.
He's going to be special, guys. He's going to be special.
Here. We'll take our victory lap. Yeah. 80-plus yards and a touchdown to help Oregon State win that game. We saw Damian Martinez grow up before our eyes in that game. He was due to break out. We have seen him so many times get tripped up just at the last second before breaking for a big run. He did have a touchdown against Montana State earlier in the year, but this felt like the kind of performance that Angie and I were expecting from him after everything that we saw in practice this offseason.
Yeah,
so
you know what?
Congrats there on Angie on the predictions.
I did say he'd be starting by game 3, so I'm not quite there yet. But you know what this game felt like to me, Carter, and you can give me your thoughts. But I was not a fan of the play calling offensively in a lot of parts of this game early. I thought the whole team just kind of played down, and I think part of that could be the Stanford Stadium. It's kind of we'll talk about that. Just no energy, no crowd. But what I saw in that fourth quarter, in the middle of the fourth quarter on, was a team that kind of took it upon themselves. And that's the veteran leadership we've talked about. But I haven't seen that from an Oregon State team in a long, long time, where they actually, it was kind of like, okay, coaches be damned, fans be damned. We're going to do this ourselves. We're going to, whether that's, McCartan with his sack, whether that was Martinez, whether that was Ben Gulbranson, whether that was Trayshawn Harrison, they just kind of said, let's go.
I don't know. I don't know what it was that clicked, but I did ask Ben Gulbranson after the game, what are the conversations like in the huddle and on the sideline and in the locker room when you guys are down by 14 points midway through this game? Nothing is going right offensively, and you're telling your guys to believe and to stay the course. And he said, man, with this team, like, regardless of what the score says, and this sounds so cliche because every team will say it, but they'll say, it's not over until it's over, that kind of thing. It is so apparent that this Oregon State team believes that and totally buys into it, because look at the Fresno State game. Very similar situation. The Beavs are down in that game. They claw back and then win it in the final minutes. That's exactly how this game played out as well. I think you're watching a team this year that, it's not always going to be pretty, and these games are going to get away from them at times, but they're not going to let up. And I think that just goes back to the culture that Jonathan Smith has built there.
And that's a testament, because this team, or this game, the past 10 years would have been a huge loss for Oregon State. So would Fresno State. So for them to be able to, it's kind of like Smith said, the trajectory is, you want to get to the point where you're winning your games at home, and then you want to be close on the road, and then you need to start winning close games at home, winning close games on the road. That's the trajectory they've taken.
Against a Stanford team, mind you, that they hadn't beaten on the farm since 2006. Another very long drought snapped by Jonathan Smith and the Beavers. He'll get a chance to do that again on Saturday when Oregon State hosts Washington State. Really, the only streak that's left to be broken at this point is that losing streak against Washington State. we'll preview that on Thursday on the damn podcast. But going back to Stanford, a place that Oregon State hadn't won in over 15 years, give you a little insight from the perspective of somebody who was actually there Saturday night. The press box at Stanford Stadium, I think, will go close to the top of my list as far as Pac-12 press boxes. Granite countertops, nice touch. The media meal, nice touch. But it is a shame that a facility that nice, that you walk in and, literally the gates surrounding the stadium have built-in floodlights, and, there's 2 concourses, and it's, the stadium itself is so beautifully constructed for there to be maybe 10,000 fans in attendance, and for about 30 to 40% of those wearing the opposing team's colors. Man, it is a shame that a school that has that nice of facilities and really that good of teams across all sports just really has no fan support.
Yeah, it's in an area, a metro area that has
very true.
So many people. We're not talking Corvallis, Eugene, Pullman. We're talking the Bay Area. It is nuts, the lack of support they get coming to their games.
The announced attendance at Stanford Stadium this week was over 32,000.
Yeah.
32,482 was the official mark. Obviously, that's tickets sold and not bodies in seats. From my estimate, I think there were probably 10,000 tops in the stadium. That's a 50,000 capacity, and I'd say about 20% of that was full at best. By the end of the game, it was just a couple of thousand. So. You mentioned it too, in a stadium where there are so few people, you think of that as being an advantage for the road team, not having the home field advantage, not having the energy going to the home team. How much do you think that plays into Oregon State's slow start? Because there is no energy at all in the stadium. I mean, you think of road games as being, well, you have to create your own energy because all of the fans in the stadium are giving it to the other team. Well, you have to create your own energy because there literally is none there.
It would feel like a scrimmage for Oregon State to just go into Reeser, and have nobody there. But that's something, though, good teams are able to do, is manufacture their own energy. But yeah, I mean, it would be they looked like, to me, that they were going through the motions early in that game. So
yeah, we'll touch a little bit more on that later on. I've got that bookmarked, that point bookmarked for the quote unquote the bad section of this podcast. Just the fact that, frankly, they looked like a team that didn't want to be there for a little bit. But so Angie, I was obviously there in Stanford. From the perspective of somebody who watched this game, albeit for a half, the ESPN crew.
Oh, so good.
Mark Jones, Robert Griffin III get the call for this game. Quint Kesselnick on the sideline. One of ESPN's top crews now, and one that has called some big games already this year. They put them in the 8 p.m. slot in Stanford. I think like 99% of the reaction that I've heard has been pretty positive. What were your takeaways on what they provided?
I thought they were fantastic. I'm one that I can, sometimes I just kind of tune them out just because sometimes I think announcers can be kind of annoying. But no, I thought they were, RG3 was funny, knowledgeable. I thought that crew did best crew I've heard Oregon had it call an Oregon State game in years.
Hunter in the YouTube chat says Robert Griffin was all caps fantastic! Exclamation point.
Funny, like I said, knowledgeable. They flashed him a couple times, and I know you were talking about at halftime. He had a ball and was kind of running routes, kind of showing things. But in the press box, he had a ball in his hand the whole time. I mean, I liked him when he played at Baylor. I thought seemed like a really good person, but just listening to his enthusiasm, he had enthusiasm for what he was doing, and it really came across. It was a really fun watch.
Yeah, RG3 was actually, one of my favorite college football players to watch during his time at Baylor. As you said, just a good dude too. But to watch him walking around the press box at halftime in the dining room area, and he's literally like running routes in the dining room. I mean, this guy was walking through like a play action play with Mark Jones as I was refilling my root beer. And I think I was on the phone with you actually at the time, Angie. That was funny to watch, and I think it was just kind of a testament to the fact that guy just breathes, sleeps football. And his, like you said, his commentary is
Yeah, I mean,
top
well,
tier
somebody
because
Hunter
of
just
it.
put in that man got more moves than a military family was one of them. He had one about breaking ankles. I mean, yeah, I mean, it was good. And honestly, I have not. I mean, but I'm old school. I didn't think it got much better than Keith Jackson. I mean, I think Keith
Mhm.
Jackson had those kind of one-liners that were so good. And like I said, RG3 was actually so entertaining with his commentary.
Yeah,
I'm not ready to
Nick
say
in the
he's
YouTube chat says he needs to be the full-time color analyst for the
yes.
Beavers. That would be pretty fun. Let's talk about this game though. We've talked about some of the we've talked about broadcast, the atmosphere, and everything. We talked about the good. That last series for Oregon State, the comeback. You look at the stat sheet all in all, and it does look pretty even, like the score would suggest. But most of that production for Oregon State came very late. Let's take a look at some of the numbers from this game. So obviously, final score: Oregon State 28, Stanford 27, 1-point margin of victory. In the yardage category, Oregon State actually ended up outgaining Stanford by nearly 100 yards. 442 to 359, and that was a mark that Stanford led in after 3 quarters. So again, just a testament to the fourth quarter success on both sides of the ball for Oregon State. But diving further into that specific number, the rushing yards stand out to me. Oregon State 192, give up just 90.
They
I mean,
doubled them
the
up.
run
Yeah.
defense there, I think, is what stands out to me, holding Stanford to 90 yards.
Yeah, and like to hold Casey Filkins to 2.9 yards a carry was huge.
2.9 yards per carry, a long of 12. Filkins is a guy who likes to get involved in the receiving game as well, and Oregon State actually bottled him up there for the most part too. So I think the Beavers, that front seven, we expected to show up a little bit against Stanford, who is a pass-first team. But again, to hold the Cardinal to under 100 yards on the ground is, that's key. That's key because you can't let a team like that. You can't let a team like that beat you on the ground too when they are known for being such a prolific passing offense. So with regard to the passing game, Stanford did edge the Beavers there, 269 passing yards to 250. But you look at the quarterback's lines, and man, Tanner McKee, former 5-star guy, generally regarded as one of the more talented quarterbacks in the Pac-12 just from a raw arm talent perspective. Ben Gulbranson was right there with him in his first career start. I mean, Gulbranson actually completed a higher percentage of his passes. They both passed for 2 touchdowns. Neither of them had an interception in the final line, but I do believe that McKee came back onto the field for that final play to throw the interception to Ryan Cooper. So, I think you look at it and you say, man, a third-year freshman in Ben Gulbranson came in for his first career start and was right there with Tanner McKee.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway with Ben Gulbranson was just his pocket awareness, his pocket presence. A couple of his sacks that he took were not the prettiest. I mean, kind of just got knocked into a little bit and fell over. So, but that's something that'll come. I mean, that was his first start. It was on the road. That's an area I look for him to make big strides in here in the next couple weeks if he continues to play.
In the turnover category, Oregon State forces 1, Stanford 0. So the Beavers kind of buck their turnover-prone trend in this game. Oregon State, of course, had the 4 picks at Utah, 4 turnovers against USC. Probably the reason they lost both of those games, and they come back and hold onto the ball. No turnovers against Stanford, and they end up winning that game by 1. But on the flip side, are you concerned that the Beavers' lone takeaway came on the very last defensive play of the game against a team that was averaging 3 turnovers per game in Stanford? They had fumbled 8 times. They had thrown the ball to the other team 4 times. The Beavers hadn't gone. They had gone a couple of weeks without forcing a turnover, and it takes them until the final play to do it against Stanford.
Yeah, I think that is the one area I would say the defense really needs to maybe improve upon is the takeaway category. We saw early in the season several takeaways, and it's kind of tailed off. Now, part of that is your opponents. I mean, when you're going against USC and Utah, and then Tanner McKee. They're going to take care of the ball. Stanford's turnovers had come on the ground. I was surprised that we didn't see any forced fumbles there, but I think the secondary is one that I expect more turnovers created from, and this weekend Washington State might be one that we see a little bit, but that'll be for Thursday. We'll talk about that.
Yep, good conversation for the next episode here. Final category that we want to highlight: tackles for loss and sacks. This one's a little striking to me, to be honest with you. Oregon State only 2 tackles for loss against Stanford. You look at the 90 rushing yards and you say, man, they must have been living in the backfield. Not really. And they only had the 1 sack. McCartan's there in the fourth quarter. Stanford, on the flip side, 8 tackles for loss against the Beavers with the 4 sacks that Angie alluded to. So I guess the first question here is, well, Oregon State came into this game on a 3-game sackless streak offensively. The O-line had protected Chance Nolan and Ben Gulbranson for 3 straight weeks. One of the best marks in college football in that total. What happened? Was it the O-line? Was it Ben just kind of sitting back there? Was it, the lack of mobility with Chance Nolan not there? What did you see that led to 4 sacks?
I think it's a combination of things. That it is a combination of you go from a very mobile quarterback in Chance Nolan that the O-line now is blocked for going on, second year. And then you bring in a guy that, well, Ben can move a little bit. He's not as mobile as Chance. So you have that. You have, as I just said, Ben's rookiness, I guess, for lack of a better term. Just his pocket presence. His pocket presence wasn't as good as a quarterback that is going to be a pocket passer. 2 of those sacks that I know of were basically just he got bumped into and fell down. So they credit him as a sack, but it wasn't like he got, ran backwards and got destroyed. He had stepped up in the pocket, got bumped into, fell down. So those were lucky. But yeah, I think it's kind of a combo. I think it was just I do think Ben Gulbranson, though, needs to improve that pocket presence a little bit and just kind of be a little more hyper aware of what's going on around him.
Okay, so since we're on the subject kind of comparing Ben and Chance, before we move on to the next segment here, when we take a look at the game flow, let's address this question that just came in the chat, because this has been something that I've been wondering all day. Tanis asks, assuming Ben keeps growing, do we have a quarterback battle on our hands? It's interesting, and I'll tell you why. Jonathan Smith wouldn't commit today in his Monday press conference to naming a starter for Saturday, saying that Chance hadn't practiced yet, wasn't sure if he would be able to practice on Tuesday. And we know from last week, and again, he doubled down this week, saying, Chance needs close to, if not a full week of practice before he gets back into the mix. So health-wise, obviously, Ben has the leg up there. But let's say those 2 are healthy. You look at the body of work so far. What do you make of this quarterback situation?
It's hard because what I think is going to be probably completely 180 degrees different from what Jonathan Smith, a former quarterback, thinks. Ben Gulbranson has the strongest arm on the team. We saw that. We saw his very first start on the road, and he made some great throws. Chance has a different aspect to his game. It's hard to take away those starts, but that he has away from him. But I don't know. I like what I would. Okay, this is what I'm going to say. I want to see more from Ben. I'll just leave it at that. I want to see what he can do. I want to see him grow. I want to see him see what he can do.
I think there's a good chance you see him again this week, to be honest with you. I just think the fact that Chance Nolan hasn't practiced, might not do so until the middle or end of the week, tells me we're probably going to see Ben come back out here this week.
Well, Jonathan last week said he wasn't ready. That he wouldn't let Chance go unless he took significant, practice the majority of the week. So I don't see how that's going to change.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll tell you this. I think what you and I have seen behind closed doors at practice with Ben Gulbranson's arm, he adds something to the offense that we don't necessarily see with Chance. On the flip side, Chance's legs are better than Ben's. Now, Ben has the ability to escape the pocket, get to the sideline, pick up a couple of yards. They're not going to run any designed runs for him. You're not going to see him, like Chance did at Utah, pick up a first down on a quarterback draw. But I do think both quarterbacks bring something unique to the offense. Chance has the leg up in that he's been the starter for a while, and Jonathan Smith's MO since coming to Oregon State has been, hey, we're going to pick a guy and we're going to stick with him. They picked Jake Luton and ran with him, even though Tristan Gebbia was there in the waiting. They picked Gebbia, and the only reason Chance Nolan supplanted him was because of an injury. And again, we saw this year, it was a quarterback battle going through camp. Chance won it. And again, even though he struggled against USC and even though he struggled in the first quarter against Utah, the only reason he got benched was because of an injury. So I say, no matter how good Ben Gulbranson, no matter how well he plays, no matter how well Ben plays, part of me just thinks that the staff is going to want to stick with Chance because that has been what they've done in the past.
But see, I would argue though, this team has so much potential and they are maybe limited by what their quarterback can do. You know what you're going to get with Chance. I think Ben's ceiling is higher. It may not be higher right now, but I think his ceiling is way more elevated than Chance. I also, you just hear too many stories about Chance not being a gym rat and in the weight room all the time or the film room, and where you kind of hear the opposite about Ben. So, yeah, good point.
Yeah, it's I guess it's I think we've reached the point now with Ben Gulbranson playing nearly 2 full games that I think we can consider this a quarterback controversy when they're both healthy. Jonathan Smith said after Utah, "Oh, it's not like a this great big controversy or anything." Well, it might be now because Ben.
Well, it was a controversy all. It was a controversy all fall camp when it didn't have to be when you had a returning starter coming back, 2 returning starters. Quite frankly, with Gebbia. I just wonder about Gebbia's health. We saw tightness during the scrimmages this fall with his hamstring, so I'm just wondering if he's not, 100% where he was before the injury. But this was a quote unquote quarterback battle, even though we saw Chance Nolan take 95% of the first team snaps.
I think the bye week coming up in 2 weeks will be interesting in that it gives them 2 weeks of practice to kind of duel it out. At that point, you would expect Chance to be at or near full strength. Again, if he doesn't go this week, you've only got 1 game before that bye, so maybe you stick with Ben and say, hey, Chance, get back up to full strength, and we'll see how this thing plays out in practice. Maybe this is determined, in those final 4 or 5 games after the bye. It's an interesting conversation that we could really have a full episode of the damn podcast on, but we got to pause here before we take before we dive back into Oregon State at Stanford, and remind you to head to BeaverBlitz.com for coverage of the Oregon State football team throughout the 2022 season. The Beavers are on the rise, and so are we at BeaverBlitz. Thanks to all of you for subscribing, for picking up that VIP subscription, and checking out all of the great content that Angie, Peter, Raju, JP, and myself are providing throughout this season. We really appreciate your support, and we'd love to have you join us if you haven't already done so. So this game starts interestingly. Oregon State wins the coin toss, elects to receive for the first time since 2019. And right away, I say, excuse you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right away, I say, okay, this is interesting. We haven't seen this game script before. Oregon State misses a field goal on that first drive, and I'm thinking, man, they wanted to establish something and they didn't, and I was nervous from the get-go because of it.
Yeah, it was not how receiving right out of the gate, not how we've been accustomed to Oregon State handling things. But yeah, it was not pretty and missed the field goal, and then Stanford turns around and scores. It was. I'm not going to lie. We were sitting watching with some friends, and we are all kind of like, huh.
Yeah. Stanford comes back on its first offensive drive and scores a touchdown. Casey Filkins finds the end zone from a yard out, his lone touchdown of the day. But it started defensively. Oregon State gives up 49 yards on the first 2 plays, and then Stanford kind of slows down, but then eventually does get into the end zone. So 49 yards on 2 plays, then Stanford goes 12 for 78. Slow start offensively, missing a field goal, slow start defensively, giving up a touchdown drive, and you leave the first quarter down 7-0 just like that with 1 drive one drive apiece, and it just felt like it was going to be one of those weird games where it's the pace is slow, teams are missing field goals, they're doing things
There's
out
no
of the
crowd
ordinary.
energy. Yeah,
exactly. It had the feeling of a Pac-12 after dark, like something weird is going to happen here. Oregon State does respond. Jack Coletto finds the end zone. Oregon State's first touchdown, another 1-yard score. But setting that up, there were a couple of big plays that set that play up that we should highlight here. Tyjon Lindsey and Jack Velling both made clutch third down plays. And again, you have a backup quarterback making his first career start. You need somebody to help him out a little bit. And on third and long, twice, Oregon State's receivers and tight ends came up with big plays. Tyjon Lindsey, a couple of shifty moves to pick up 12 on a 3rd and 9, and then Jack Velling hauls in an 18-yard diving catch to move the ball down to the 1-yard line and setting up that score.
Yeah, that was a great, like I said, Velling's catch was huge. I think that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I expect him to be the next great tight end. He's young, true freshman, but I expect to see him just continue to grow in that role. And then, Tyjon Lindsey, another one that I've had some, criticisms of, has really stepped up too of late.
Yeah, that was actually a 99-yard scoring drive for Oregon State because as the chat is reminding us, that drive did start with kind of an interesting play where you've got Silas Bolden receiving the kickoff after Stanford scores, and he runs it back for a pretty nice return. In fact, he nearly housed it.
Yeah.
But the play was called back because Jack Coletto allegedly called for fair catch.
It looked like he did. I mean, I'm just gonna. It did look like he did from TV.
Interesting. So I've heard two things, and again, I obviously wasn't watching Coletto live. I've got my eyes on Bolden because I know that he's the one who's about to receive this thing. I have heard that from one person's perspective, it looked like he was kind of waving Bolden out, saying, "Hey, return it." Another saying, "Yeah, it looks like he kind of called fair catch," which is interesting because if he's not returning it, why is he doing that? The rule is probably in place to prevent teams from faking the kicking team out. But end of the day, the return's called back. They say dead ball at the 1 where it's caught because there was a fair catch called. Now, normally on kickoffs, you take fair catch and it comes out to the 25. But because of that whole, we don't want teams faking each other out, that ball's placed on the 1. So in case that wasn't, like I said, I wasn't watching on the TV broadcast, so I don't know if that was explained, but that was kind of what the conclusion we came to in the press box there.
Yeah, that's.
Let's move ahead now. Joshua Carty, the Stanford kicker, had a couple of long field goals, and his 47-yarder on the ensuing possession gave Stanford a 10-7 lead. So both teams responding quickly here now as we get moving here in the second quarter. But on that drive, the 4th unsportsmanlike penalty of the game called. This is early second quarter.
Yeah.
And both teams have 2 unsportsmanlike penalties. What was kind of going through your mind on that end? Because that was a big storyline actually in this game.
Yeah, it was.
And
You and I were
Jonathan
texting
Smith
back and forth.
Addressed after the game and again today on Monday.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, Oregon State and Stanford would be so chippy, but it was early. It was very chippy. You and I, there was some confusion about Brandon Kipper because it appeared he had got his 2nd unsportsmanlike, which would have been an automatic disqualification. You were able to confirm in the press box. This is where it's great having one of us watching on the TV, one of us, in the press box, because you were able to confirm that it was actually, they called the first unsportsmanlike was supposedly on, was it Brewer?
Yeah, so that situation was interesting because we went essentially a full quarter before we got an answer. But the first unsportsmanlike, which was really like the 3rd in this game, was an offsetting penalty that they called on number 50 on Oregon State. Well, Oregon State doesn't have a number 50 on its offensive line. They correct that after the play to 68. Well, it wasn't actually on Kipper either. It turns out they were trying to correct it to 60, Marco Brewer, but misannounced it. So when Brandon Kipper got called for his 2nd, kind of like I'd put 2nd in air quotes on the ensuing drive, the reason he was not ejected was because the prior one was not actually
On
given
him.
to him, even though he was announced as the offending player.
Okay,
So
I just need to interject here because the people that were watching at home will totally get me on this. That Pac-12 referee, seriously, I think he wanted to be
Mark
an
Duddy.
open mic comedian because he was on making calls way too often. He was making his voice heard.
yeah, Brian Miller says, how weird was it how often we were hearing refs?
Serious, Brian.
Well, so here's another little insight from the press box. You might have been hearing him on TV, but we couldn't hear him in the press box because unlike everywhere else, they didn't actually have a mic connected to a speaker in the box. So we couldn't hear a word he was saying throughout the game, which, as you can imagine, when this ref, turns on his mic, goes to the pocket, twists the mic thing about 25 times in this game, because
or
that crew
more,
was as
25
flag happy
times
as
in
I've
the
ever
first
seen.
quarter.
Yeah, I couldn't hear a thing. So that added to the confusion, particularly on those unsportsmanlike calls where I'm like, what number did he just say? Yeah, that was not ideal. And a crew that I hope that we do not see at an Oregon State game for quite some time. Just flag
He was
happy.
right up there with Glasses Ref. Remember Glasses Ref?
Yeah, Jay Strickers.
Yes, Jay Strickers.
Jay Strickers. All right, moving back to the game flow. A couple of 3-and-outs after that. Things started to slow down, but then Bryson Tremaine for Stanford makes an unbelievable catch, which I guess was kind of a trend in this game, was the impressive play from the receivers. Bryson Tremaine hauls in 20-yard touchdown catch. Great ball from Tanner McKee again on that. So Stanford builds a double-digit lead at 17-7. Very late in the half, Oregon State goes 3-and-out. Halftime, it's a 17-7 game, and we're saying, wow, what on earth is going on? Because we expected Oregon State to maybe not necessarily roll, but I think we expected Oregon State to kind of control this thing. I know the first half line was Oregon State -4. Certainly not the case. And then, of course, since they received the opening kickoff, you think, all right, this team's coming back out and has to play defense down 10 in the third quarter.
Yeah, no, it was not, like I said, I think that's when I fell asleep the first time from being up since 3:30 in the morning.
We appreciate the honesty there.
Yes, I'm going to be completely brutally honest, guys.
The defense for Oregon State did bounce back in the second half, and it started on that first drive. The Beavers need to stop because you can't afford to go down 17 points in the second half. The Beavers get a stop, force Stanford to go 3-and-out, and then they pick up a few points on the other end. Atticus Sappington missed a 40-yard field goal early on in the game on the opening drive, but then bounced back, hit a 40-yarder on that drive, but that was only because of a couple of penalties. So shout out again to Mark Duddy and crew. A touchdown for Oregon State gets called back for holding. Sappington comes on, misses a 45-yarder, but gets wiped away for an offsides, and then he converts the 40. So just one of those things where you're like, man, can we just let these guys play? Like, the holding call on the touchdown was on a receiver, kind of away from the play. The offsides, all right, fair enough. But man, just what a sequence there.
I mean, that's the whole game. The whole early part of the game just felt disjointed, I think, in large part because of the penalties being called. But here it is, third quarter, and now the Beavs are only down by 7.
Yeah.
And then the defense forced a 3-and-out.
But then Oregon State goes 3-and-out. So you have a couple of 3-and-outs there, and Stanford gets another touchdown from Bryson Tremaine. This one a 37-yarder. So he's got 2 touchdowns to his name at this point, leading scorer in the game. Stanford has a 24-10 lead through 3 quarters. Yeah. Its biggest lead there at 24-10, 14 points. But then the fourth quarter happens, and again we open the show with this. Just one of the best quarters of football I've seen from Oregon State in quite some time. A gritty performance. Silas Bolden's 21-yard touchdown, 21-yard touchdown reception to open the fourth quarter. Probably the best play we've seen from him. He's had a couple of touchdowns on fly sweeps. He's shown off his speed. But to make a catch like that, where you're toe tapping in the end zone, where you're catching the ball with a guy right in your face, that's the Silas Bolden you and I saw in spring and fall camp, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot. I'm reading the comments. There's a lot of good comments. We got to hustle through the rundown here so we can get to some comments.
Yeah, we'll touch on those at the end here. Where again, kind of a jam-packed show with a game that really I think had a lot to dive into. But A couple of defensive, a couple of solid defensive possessions here midway through the fourth quarter until things got really crazy. Damian Martinez rattles off the 43-yard touchdown run. Oregon State doesn't have to, but chooses to go for two because long snapper Dylan Black was pulled from the game with an injury. They missed the 2-point conversion, so they're down two at 24-22 with 5 3/4 ish of a minute left. I think, about 5:45 on the clock at that point, down 2 points. Again, your defense comes on the field and you have to get a stop, right?
Yeah. And that's what John McCartan did.
John McCartan with the sack. I was down on the field at that point, and that play happened right in front of me. And I said, all right, well, this is the game right here. John McCartan, the biggest play of his career, potentially. He's had a couple. He had a couple early on. That interception he had against Cal in the COVID year was pretty big too. And then, so Angie, be honest with me here. Were you asleep on that next play when Trayshawn Harrison goes 56 yards?
Can I plead the fifth?
All right. Well, one of us was awake. So
yes, I did have to watch that later.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I saw. So I was standing on the opposite end of the field. I was on Oregon State's side, so I was kind of next to the bench, but I was on the opposite side of the field. And so Harrison's, they're moving the ball away from me. Ben Gulbranson made a couple of nice throws to get the ball moving there. They have no timeouts. So, this is like, it's not necessarily offense's worst nightmare, but you're not in a good situation. And this is where you say, man, you've got a redshirt freshman quarterback making his first start. You're really going to make him run a 2-minute drill? Well, call it 45 seconds. Call it a 45-second drill.
I mean,
he completes a couple of passes, puts the ball where only Harrison can get it. Not the greatest throw, but again, to his credit, defender wasn't going to make a play on that ball. Harrison makes one of the best catches of the college football season, probably.
It was amazing.
Go and grab that against.
Like you said, it's one of those things too. Stanford was kind of left stunned because I don't think they thought he caught it. Yeah, I know, Aiden. I know. Seriously, you guys. Like I said, I got up at 3:30 in the morning to catch a flight. I was exhausted, and that first half of that game was so bad, and I totally fell asleep.
The YouTube chat is just absolutely berating Angie right now. And hey, I mean, it was a long travel day. I'm on the recovering side of a long travel day myself, so I get it. Very exciting.
I will say that my 14-year-old son and Eric and some of our best friends that we were staying with in Tucson, they were up and they watched it. And he's a Beaver, one of my husband's fraternity brothers, and they watched it. And yes.
Tana says the self-named Midnight Miracle,
yes, Midnight Miracle
will be a quote unquote "Where were you when blank" moment.
Angie was asleep in Tucson.
Angie was asleep in Tucson. I was on the Oregon State bench.
Carter's texting me the next morning. I seriously had 20 texts. Carter asking me to update the live updates. My brother, who's a huge Beaver fan, is texting me nonstop. Peter, Raju, everybody's texting me, and I was asleep in Tucson. Yes. I'm old though, Carter. You're young.
Young maybe, but not as resilient as I would hope on the lack of sleep here. But it kind of put the finishing touches on how this game finished. So Oregon State, interestingly, and this was a point of discussion in Jonathan Smith's Monday press conference, they decided to kneel on the 2-point conversion. So they say, all right, we're not going to risk it. There's essentially one play, maybe two, / Hail Mary field goal on the ensuing possession. But in that situation, there's one play that can beat you, and it's Stanford returning that thing for 2 points the other way. Very conservative play call that Jonathan Smith today, Monday, said, you know what, that's my call. I don't like it. He said just flat out, didn't like the call I made there. It was way too conservative. Which is so interesting
because he is usually so gutsy.
Right. Yeah.
For him to, that was, my brother was I think ready to have a coronary on that one. The text string there, if you read my text string, it was the funniest thing. It was maybe some expletives thrown in there. And it was. So
a little insight there, because we are recording this show after Smith's Monday press conference, which we don't normally do. So some insight on the 2-point conversions. Dylan Black left this game, the long snapper, with an injury cut his hand, and so Oregon State elects to go for 2. Again, Smith's call. They did have a second long snapper that made the trip. Peyton Hogan made the trip and actually played a little bit. He snapped on one of the punts. Smith elected, hey, he said, we've already missed a field goal. We've got our second string kicker, our second string long snapper. We're just going to go for 2 the rest of the way here. In hindsight, Smith regrets those decisions. He would have rather have just kicked them. Or at least, on that last one, would have rather gone for it than kneeling.
Yeah.
I understand it. I understand it. Something happens, Stanford returns that game, or Stanford returns the thing, and you lose the game because of it. Stinks. But the odds of that happening are so much lower than you getting 2-3 yards and making it a 3-point game.
Especially when you have the hammer.
Exactly.
Jackhammer.
Which who they didn't use on any of the 2-point conversions. Very interesting. The game ends on the Oregon State kicks it off. Stanford gets the ball. Game ends as Ryan Cooper Jr. Comes down with an interception, and Oregon State kneels the thing and wins it by 1. Remarkable, just remarkable ending to that game.
Yeah. I mean, that last 5 minutes, 50 seconds or whatever, unreal. Probably one of the best quarters of football I've seen from Oregon State, maybe since the Fiesta Bowl.
It's a good transition here into one of the next segments here on the damn podcast. We're going to go over an hour today, I think, but let's just highlight some of the good, and most of it does come from the fourth quarter, but there's some other stuff here throughout the game that we've kind of touched on that I want to highlight. So the fourth quarter sequence, the 3 touchdowns, the sack, obviously is the highlight of the game, but the rushing success, I want to talk about this because it wasn't one of our keys to the game, but it was a point where we said, Oregon State should have success here. Stanford looks really porous on that front 7. Haven't been able to slow offensives down at all this year. And the Beavers, for the most part, did. They were held under 200, which was, kind of one of those magic numbers. You say, well, this could be a spot for Oregon State to crack 200. Just under that at 192.
Yeah.
But 3 guys having success. Damon Martinez goes 3 for 83 and a touchdown. Jam Griffin, again, very efficient, averaging 5.8 yards per carry, 13 carries for 75 yards. And then Deshaun Fenwick at 14 for 54. So the reason I bring this up now, and I want to talk about this again, this has been something we've talked about the last couple of weeks, has been the carry distribution. And I know how you feel about this. So I'll let you, I'll give you a chance here to stand in front of the lectern and tell us a little bit how you think the running game should look for Oregon State moving forward.
Well, we've talked about it week in, week out about this whole three running back system and not letting guys kind of get into a rhythm. I think it's becoming more and more clear. Now, Oregon State keeps going with Fenwick as number 1. Nothing against Deshaun Fenwick, but I think it's becoming more and more clear that I would go, my starter would be Jam Griffin at 1 and then Damian Martinez 2. And bring in Deshaun if you need a third down back, because I'm just looking at straightaway efficiency, and Jam Griffin is getting it done, flat out getting it done. I think we're starting to see some glimmers from Damian Martinez, maybe not as quickly as I thought we would see that, but I still think he's a better second option than Deshaun Fenwick. And I don't like the rotation. Let one of the guys be more of a focal back. Just my 2 cents. Like I said, I sound like if you watch was it Thursday night game, and Richard Sherman was on after that game, the Denver, I don't even know. Indianapolis. And he's like, run the ball. But I just want to see him with one or two, give one of them instead of distributing it like they do.
Yeah, and you got to remember this thing is going to get even murkier when Trey Lowe eventually does come back. Could be as soon as this week. I wouldn't bank on it, but it does sound like he's getting closer and closer to a return. Adding a 4th running back into that mix, and man, I can't tell you who the odd man out is right now, because production-wise, it would tell you that it's Fenwick, but he has been Oregon State's leading carrier volume-wise. And again, this week he was, again, the least efficient. You look at the yards per carry number at 3.9. And yet he has one more carry than Fenwick, or one more carry than Griffin, and 11 more than Martinez. So I'm interested to see if anything changes there in the near future. I know how you feel about it, and I'm frankly kind of on board with the way you see it. Defensively, again, want to highlight Oregon
Yeah.
State holding Stanford to 90 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Pretty impressive performance there, and Oregon State's ability to hold on to the ball this week, of course, in a 1-point game. It's a difference. Turnovers are the difference. They have been for Oregon State this year. The not so good for Oregon State. Penalties, 9 for 90, 3 unsportsmanlike calls. A testament, I think, to where Oregon State's morale was at entering this game. We have heard so many times, the leadership, the player-led movement on this team, everybody's bought in. Didn't look like it in the first half. Felt like a team that was giving off, quote unquote, don't want to be here vibes, the 3 unsportsmanlike calls, the discipline across the board, lack of energy. Really weird to see.
It didn't look like the team that we'd seen.
No. Offensive play calling, anything stand out to you? Because I'll tell you one that does to me.
Go for it.
Deep ball on 2nd and 10 from your own 35. That's a running play. That's a running play or a screen or a short call.
But that's again where offensive coordinator, and this is where you start second guessing the offensive play calling sometimes and abandoning the run. I mean, this is a Stanford team that was giving up 225 plus yards a game. Oregon State was actually doing pretty well. And then, you do a play like that when you have a team that's been throwing interceptions. Head scratcher to me.
Yeah, it's there have been a couple of calls every week. And I mean, there usually are with most teams. We can sit here and play Monday morning quarterback and, Sunday afternoon offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
There's always going to be calls that, you look back on and you want back. Jonathan Smith, of course, wanting those 2-point conversions back. But I just think it's been a concerning trend for Oregon State that has built this reputation as being an offensive, being led by offensive masterminds and putting up all sorts of crazy offensive numbers the last 4.5 years. Just not really seeing that this year.
Yeah.
So I think, again, kind of reared its head in this game. Pass defense,
so
a weakness this week.
No. But do you think that part of that was maybe the game plan to maybe stay home a little bit and not with that slow mesh offense, not commit guys?
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just something I thought about because you don't want to bring the house against Tanner McKee.
I can see that. I think that's probably why you don't see the giant tackle for loss and sack numbers.
I think if we don't see better sack numbers and tackles for loss this next week against Washington State, then I think we have something more to talk about.
I'll tell you this, though. I mean, seeing Bryson Tremaine go 6 catches, 82 yards, and 2 touchdowns, I don't think that's on conservative play. I just think there were a couple of breakdowns in the defensive backfield. And credit to him. I mean, he made a couple of very nice catches. There was coverage on those plays, but it just feels weird, for us to be talking about, hey, Oregon State gave up a couple of big passing plays. That's not really been a thing this year. We already touched on the tackles for loss and sacks on the other side, so we don't need to go in depth with that again. The injury tracker.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people asking about that in comments.
Yeah, so didn't open the show with this just because this is more of a game wrap or a game recap episode and wrapping up Stanford. But the big news today from the injury side of things is that Alton Julian will miss the entirety of the 2022 season. BeaverBlitz has confirmed that after Alton went on Twitter and tweeted, kind of cryptically, 2023 ... We have dug into that and we have learned that he will miss the entire 2022 season, which, again, Jonathan Smith kind of said this earlier in the year. He basically went as far as saying, we don't really need him right now. Like the safety room and the defensive backfield as a whole is just so strong that why take a risk? Let's let Alton Julian heal up. So best wishes to Alton Julian on his ACL recovery.
Absolutely. And that's always a tough one, but if there's a year to miss, it's this one, and then come back at 100% next year and be ready to go. So Dylan Black, do we have an update on him yet?
Hopeful, but not certain that he will return this week. Again, he cut his hand up in that Stanford game and left partway through, which I mean,
Okay.
long snapper injuries are always just so weird because like every team has more than one long snapper, but you rarely see them. And,
Yeah, exactly.
so it'll be interesting to see what Oregon State does there at that position this week.
Yeah. So Trey Lowe, I know is getting close. Luke Musgrave is unavailable. You know, this is just me and Carter speculating. I don't think we see Luke Musgrave the rest of the year. And
Yeah,
I would be
I don't know if we ever see him at
I was going to say
Oregon State,
I don't think we see him ever again in the Beaver uniform.
Yeah, I just think somebody will take a shot on him NFL wise, and he's recovering from an injury that clearly is more serious than we thought in the the immediate aftermath of that Fresno State game. Chance Nolan, as we said earlier, still recovering from the neck injury, hasn't practiced, may or may not return to practice by the middle of the week. We'll see. So don't bank on seeing him this weekend. I would say it's more likely than not that Ben Gulbranson gets the start just based off of what we know at this point. But again, nothing certain there. Joe Golden and oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and I'm just putting this out there. This is just Carter and I speculating. We don't have any inside info here, but from what I have been hearing, like I said, I would be surprised.
On Chance.
Musgrave, sorry.
Oh, on Musgrave.
On Musgrave. And well, actually Chance this year too, or this game too. I think we're still a week out.
So Musgrave, career-wise or season-wise, and then Nolan week-to-week wise, we're saying probably won't see him. Joe Golden on the defensive line, Everett Hayes the kicker, both nearing a return. They're probably going to be like that day-to-day game time decision type thing. I will say Oregon State is very limited on personnel as far as who can travel. They have a limit as far as how many guys they can take down to Stanford, and Everett Hayes was there. He was in street clothes, which tells me that was like emergency. Sappington goes down, like Hayes is close enough to play. Groin injuries are tough. Nolan did not. No, he stayed back in Corvallis. Groin injuries are tough, especially if you're a kicker. But to see him down there at Stanford, I guess just tells you that he's at least somewhat close to coming back.
Yeah.
And then of course the Julian news there to round out the injury report that we just touched on. Before we get out of here, our last little segment as we cross the 1 hour mark. Keys to the game. We both agreed offensively. Hold on to the ball. Yeah, resounding yes. No turnovers.
Absolutely.
First time since the Montana State game, Oregon State goes turnoverless on the offensive side. So now tell me this. Going against a Washington State team, and this is more of a Thursday conversation, but going against a Washington State team that has turned Oregon State over in the past, is led by a defensive coach and Jake Dickert. Maybe a little preview to your key to the game this week is that gonna rear its head again? Is that gonna be your key to the game offensively again? Because look at it. I mean, it's been the difference in the last 3 games.
Exactly. I mean, that has been Oregon State beats USC if they don't have 4 turnovers, and it's a hell of a lot closer and possibly a win at Utah if they have half the turnovers.
And a loss against Stanford if they turn it over even once.
Exactly. So it's absolutely going to be my key to the game.
Defensively, I said Oregon State needed to flex its defensive backfield muscles, as we just kind of highlighted in the not so good portion. Didn't really happen. Stanford kind of got what it wanted in the passing game, which to an extent we expected. Again, Tanner McKee, great quarterback, very solid receiving core. I think underappreciated given how poorly this team has played in other areas this year. That's a good passing attack and probably low key one of the better ones Oregon State will see this year.
Absolutely.
So I'm as you said, I'm not reading too much into it.
Yeah. Not yet. Let's give it another week or two.
Yeah. With no EJ Smith at running back for Stanford, we said make Casey Filkins beat you. He had the touchdown, but by and large, he did not beat them.
No.
I guess kind of a 50-50 there on the success on that key to the game. Didn't you? You had another defensive key, didn't you?
I don't remember, Carter.
Okay.
Carter.
Yeah.
Carter.
This is why we should write these things down, isn't it?
But I will say that I feel that this game is a huge momentum, not only for the fan base, but for the team, because this game had that feeling that if the Beavers lost, things could have spiraled out of control pretty quickly. And now with a win, 4-2, You have a winnable game against Washington State at home. You have a winnable game against Colorado at home. You have 2 home games coming up and could be bowl eligible here by the end of October, which would be huge.
I'm just kind of reading through the YouTube chat to see if there's anything we should touch on before we get out of here. Again, appreciate everyone for watching us live on YouTube, even though we're on kind of a different schedule this week. Angie, anything you want to add before we get out of here? Because it's been kind of a comprehensive show. It's a little weird that we're doing this on a Monday because we do have some newsy type stuff to talk about since we've talked to Jonathan today. But
so Aiden Hill, did I maybe was my other defensive key QB pressure? I don't remember. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds vaguely familiar. Well, Oregon State didn't really do that.
No, they didn't do that either. But yeah,
I guess that answers that question there.
Carter, you're supposed to write down what I say.
I know. Sorry. There's so many different things going on. If you could see my screen when we record these things, I've got like all different tabs pulled up. I really should just get my second monitor out for these things because
yes. So Brian Miller says, and Ben needs to take a breath and not freak out if there's a single defender in his pocket. Seriously, Brian, I know you came in late, but Ben, 2 of those sacks actually were like someone just kind of bumping into Ben. His pocket awareness was not great.
That's just, I think, a youth type situation. Yeah. I think that's an area where Ben Goldbranson improves in the future. Again, I think you probably see him this week. Just my hunch. Oregon State will play Washington State on Stanford. Pac-12 Network. Thoughts?
And Colorado's Pac-12 Network.
Yeah. Back to the Pac-12 Network. Hey, I'll take it if it means that we're not
I want RG3
working
back.
until 4 a.m. But
I want RG3 back.
Yeah,
but that would be an 8 o'clock kick, and Carter. That would be too late for Carter.
Yep. This is
obviously too late for me.
Yes, clearly. This is a 6 p.m. kickoff on Saturday. We're going to be back on Thursday to preview it. We thank you again for joining us live on YouTube. Anywhere you find your podcasts, we are there as well. I'm going to get some sleep here in just a short couple of hours. Angie's got some fun stuff to do down in Arizona while she's on, kind of a quasi vacation here, even though it's game week. She's still working behind the scenes.
We're doing college visits. Carter, that's another whole topic. How my kid does not want to go to Oregon State. Where did I lead him astray?
One of them, at least.
Yes. My oldest one. Exactly. OSU, and he doesn't want to go. He wants to go to Arizona. I spent yesterday touring University of Arizona. Yeah.
Fun stuff. Tucson.
All
right. Let's get out of here. Angie, thanks for hopping on here on a Monday night. Thanks to everyone again for watching and listening. We're going to be back on Thursday to preview Oregon State's game against Washington State. Until then, you can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns. We'll talk to you Thursday for another episode of the damn podcast.